With you this Sunday. Thank you for your invitation, and I have wonderful memories of your fellowship. I wanted to share a little bit of some stories really from the past to help us through this year, because this has been a tough year. It's dented a lot of people's confidence, I think. COVID, some were perhaps furloughed that never thought they might be. Some have had business troubles, and that wasn't really foreseen. It's been a hard year, and so we desperately need, as it were, a hope injection through this time. So I've always said, and perhaps even to you in an earlier visit, that everybody needs 3 churches to get by. Church Magnificent, that's the great artists and thinkers that open up the world to us in new ways. Church Triumphant, which is very often the persecuted church for many of us, where you see people triumphing over evil in the power of God, and that gives you a great lift. But there's a third church, and it's called Church Mediocre, or Church Ordinary. That's us. That's you. That's me. Ordinary people who are just offering whatever they can to God. Sometimes it's our fears, sometimes it's our foolishness, sometimes it's even our failures, and we hope and pray that God is going to do something about that or through that. And I think if we look at this group and how they operate, that's where we get a hope injection for this time. I've been reflecting a little bit on my life as I come up to an important transition point, and I was looking back and realized some amazing people and some very eccentric people that I had been privileged to travel with and be in ministry with over the years. And I wanted just to share some of those experiences in the hope of giving you a hope injection. I'm part of Church Mediocre. I'm nobody special. In fact, when I was a pastor at 24, I managed to empty a church in 15 months. It started with about 180, and when I left, there were about 65. So I'm not coming to you as any great shakes. I've struggled in my Christian life, and sometimes I don't know how to make sense of it. But I'm part of Church Mediocre, and I'm trusting that God will do something through me and through you through this time. So my first story is coming from Romania. And it's back in the days when I was a Bible smuggler. And I must say, I thought that I would be the James Bond of Bible smugglers. I thought I could handle the pressure. I thought I would be just fine. And when you're 23, you're not scared of anything, are you? And this was the time when Bible smuggling had become a very sophisticated operation. It wasn't just where you went up to the border with a caravan and you had some Bibles concealed in the walls or whatever. That just got a few in. No, this was where we actually had an arrangement where there was a big 40-ton truck. It would go into the country with a legitimate cargo, but a system had been built in it that could conceal 30,000 Bibles. And what we would also do is 2 of us would go in with a van, a VW, usually a VW transporter van, and we would go in through the border clean. And then we would meet this lorry on the other side. We would transfer the Bibles into our vehicle. And of course, there was no attempt at hiding them. You couldn't really hide them. If anybody saw inside, the game was up. And this was dangerous because if they saw 30,000 Bibles in a van, they would realize you hadn't brought them through the border. This was a big, sophisticated operation, and you would be jailed. So we went into Romania at this time, and we didn't know what we were doing, really. I mean, I look back on it all and think, how did God use people like me and others? We couldn't speak German, so we drove around Austria for half a day, wondering what this big sign called Ungarn was. U-N-G-A-R-N. It was German for Hungary, but we never knew this. We actually went the opposite direction. We lost half a day, and we were wondering, panicking actually, whether we would even do the rendezvous. But fortunately, that was okay. We had only one we had only one phrase of Romanian, and it was called Mult Biblia. It just meant many Bibles, and you memorized your contacts. The danger also with this operation was you made multiple drops. So you had 5 days when you were still having a lot of Bibles. So that was extra stressful. So we made the transfer. We got through the border, okay, into Romania, drove up into the beautiful Transylvanian Alps. Romania is a gorgeous country, beautiful people too. And the first thing you do is you go to the village of the contact and you recce it in broad daylight. You come back at night when it's totally dark, and but I had to see where he was. So we went in. Our contact was a man called Nicola Budaru, and he was living in this house, and you saw this big ditch on the side of the road. A little plank was across it. There was a door in the wall, but we were warned not to try the door or use a torch because it was not known whether there was anyone in the village who was a Christian or not. So we looked at it. The concern we had that there were a lot of geese around, and geese are a real problem if you try to sneak in at night because they can create an awful racket. So we just really prayed about that. So then we decided we knew what we were doing, and we drove off, and we waited, and we had some sleep. And then all of a sudden, there's this banging on the outside of the vehicle. And sure enough, we look round, and there's a policeman. And the moment he would look in the vehicle would be the end of us. And so I went out, and I began to speak to him. But it was as if I was being squeezed by a bear. And so all I could say to him was, "Grrrr." And I thought, oh, Lord, I'm having a stroke. I'm 23 and I'm having a stroke. So I tried again. Whoosh. I couldn't say a thing. My throat had completely seized up. And I tried smiling at him, and I could see the fear spreading over his face. And the other guy who was driving with me, he leaned out the driver's side, and he went like this to the policeman. He pointed at me, and he went like this, which is kind of universal code for, nutcase alert. And so the policeman relaxed. Oh, okay. Yeah. And so he walked away, and he never looked into the vehicle. And I felt terrible about it because I thought I would be so cool and strong under those conditions. And I remember getting back in the vehicle, and this guy said, "That was very clever of you to play the idiot," because, I was literally nodding with the pulsing of my heart. And I think that also frightened the policeman. But I never admitted to him that this hadn't really been an act. And then we're driving back to the village down a steep hill. And again, in this narrow road through the forest, we're probably driving a bit too fast. I'm driving this time. Out comes a uniformed policeman with these incredible big epaulets on his shoulders. And he stands in the middle of the road going like this. And I jammed on the brakes, and I thought, what's going to happen now? And then a small box of Bibles detached itself from the pile behind us, and it flew past my nose, and because we had skewed about 45 degrees, it flew out the window, the open window, and it hit him straight on the forehead. And he went down like a sack, and we thought, oh, Lord, we've killed him. What do we do? Because you don't get briefed for killing a policeman with a box of Bibles. So we got out, and fortunately he had a faint pulse, and we checked to make sure that he hadn't swallowed his tongue or something like that. He looked white, but he wasn't grey, which was the good news. He was breathing, and we thought, well, what do? We'll drag him off to the side. So we just pulled him gently into the undergrowth, and I wonder to this day what he remembered of that incident. But again, quite a deliverance, and nothing to do with us. And then we got at midnight to the village where Nicola Budara was sleeping actually. And so I got carefully out and I picked one of the Bibles off so that I could shout Biblia to him. But I could show it at least because maybe my throat would seize up again and I would make strange noises to him. So I get out and I try to pinpoint in the dark where this little narrow plank is across the deep ditch which the sewer is running. And I find it, and I take 2 steps, and the next minute I'm at the bottom of the ditch. I'd completely missed my footing. And that wakes up the geese. And they come waddling down the trench, and they start honking and hissing. And so I scramble up. Of course, the door is shut, so I have to get up onto this 10-foot high wall. And then this huge dog appears. And he's in the very garden I have to drop into. And he's massive. I mean, there's the deep fundamental barks. He must have been some sort of outsized German shepherd or something like that. By this time, the geese have reached us, and their cacophony has awakened the village. Lights are coming on, other dogs are barking. We couldn't have made more of an entrance if we'd been a Mongol horde. So I thought, I better jump down, but I have to jump down into this garden where this dog is. So I leapt off and I slipped as I did. There was kind of scree on the top of the wall. And so I ended up dropping bottom first and straight on top of that dog. And there was an almighty crack. And I thought, that's my hips gone. I've broken my hips. How are we going to manage with that in Romania? It's amazing how fast the brain twirls when you're in these situations. But I bounced back up again, actually. It was a lovely soft landing. And I think the damage was all done to the dog. And don't get me wrong, I'm a dog lover, but that dog saved my life. And I think he gave his life for me, but I never really found out what happened to the dog. There was a torch shone in my face, and I shouted, "Molt Biblia! Molt Biblia!" I could get the words out this time. And I held up the Bible, but I actually didn't have it because it must have been in the sewer. "Oh, mon frère, mon frère!" And this was Nicola Budaru. And so, being a wonderful hospitality culture, they brought us inside. They found a loaf of bread, cut it up, and wafted a couple of eggs over a kerosene stove. And we ate them, even though the eggs were completely uncooked. They were the gift for kings, all they had. And so you ate it as, asking God to bless the meal and keep you from sickness. And so I remember thinking, why did God do this through us? How generous of him. Because we were the representatives of Church Mediocre, Church Ordinary. We didn't know what we were doing. And yet, in a sense, the church always runs on the influence of what you might call the kind of committed amateur. That's what we are. We're committed amateurs. It's the most effective institution in the world because it's dispersed. We're everywhere. We're in the villages. We're in the neighborhoods. We're not just at the top. We're right at the bottom. And this makes the body of Christ the most effective institution in the world to bring change. And so we all get a walk-on part. We must do. If someone like me can deliver Bibles to Romania and see all those deliverances, 2 cheers, if not 3, for Church Mediocre, which we're all part of. Nicola Budaru was an interesting man, and 2 years later, I read in a Radio Free Europe report that he had been picked up by the secret police and tortured for receiving Bibles, perhaps the Bibles we had brought. And he had been sat on a chair and they had lowered an umbrella down on top of him, but the umbrella, and he noticed it was made in West Germany, and it passed electrical charges into his body. And he said, when I felt the charge, my brains moved, he said. And Nicola Budaru never regained full cognition. He only had half a mind after that moment. So, aren't these stories incredible? The price so many pay, and yet how God uses the committed amateur to bring blessing, to bring joy. Nicola Budaru would pay that price again. We're living in a strange world, aren't we? We now find ourselves where a belligerent communist superpower is really throwing its weight around, especially in places like Hong Kong. And we're finding too that even in the West, there are protest movements that, even though they start from very genuine grievances, have taken on a kind of totalitarian twist. And they do not like anybody thinking different to them. And I want to think, who won the Cold War anyway? What kind of world is this? It's a world where we need church mediocre more than ever before.